That is
So
correct.
thank you for checking out my video. I'm glad somebody watched it.
You know what? I'm gonna put a like in there too. Hold on.
Did
I
we
was
ever
gonna throw a
stop
like
going
in
live?
there.
Yeah, we lost live and then I put it back on.
Okay.
Okay,
Give me
great.
2 seconds. We should be good. Everything should be working now.
Yay.
Okay.
I'll know in a second.
I hear the intro.
That wasn't the intro. That's a TurboTax commercial on Twitch.
Subcreeb.
Can anyone hear the water running in my mic? I will mute myself if you can.
No.
Cool, we're good. Everything's working.
No.
We're good. No one can hear your motor running. You're fine.
So
All
water
right.
away.
Go.
Thank you.
So we're back?
Yeah,
We're back.
You didn't have audio the whole time.
Okay, great.
So redo intros.
Hey, welcome back to Table Topics. The voice edition this part. So
time
things
with
are all
audio.
different due to our super fun virus that has been going around the world. We have some really awesome creators, writers, game creators, game masters. Everyone, if you want to just say your name and then we'll just go right into it.
Hi, I'm Rachel.
I'm Tennyson.
I'm Jacob.
I'm Brandon.
And we're Justin and Michael, and this is our show. So I wanted to, because we got cut off a little bit earlier, I kind of wanted to ask you guys what got you into tabletop RPGs, because there's been definitely a gaming renaissance of where it's kind of like it was something that was like on the down low, and now it's completely in the mainstream. So yeah, what got you guys into that? We'll start with Rachel.
So I talked about this a little bit on a different podcast earlier this week, but basically I got into it because when I was in high school, when I was like 15, I have a younger brother, and he and his friends super got into D&D, and our parents totally didn't get it. They thought it was super weird. And also, like, I tended to be the babysitter because I was older enough than them. So it ended up being like, they're like, we want to go to the game shop. Can you take us to the game shop? And then I was there too, so I played too. And it was a lot of fun. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then I went to college, met up with some other people who wanted to play. And I was like, well, I have experience. I've played before. None of them had. So I ended up GMing. And people just keep asking me to do more stuff. So I guess I'm not terrible at it. So, it's a lot of fun. And it's kind of just grown from there.
That's a beautiful thing. Tennyson, so you kind of were talking about it in the previous. What kind of got you into role-playing games? Because you've been playing for so long.
I went to a boarding school, and there weren't any cool kids at the boarding school. It was a bunch of nerds who were all exceptional in their own way and who kind of came together into sort of a Charles Xavier situation. And it was awesome. It was a great experience. And I'm every day I'm reminded of how lucky I am to have had it. But the kids that I were spending the most time with were the theater kids. And at night they were all playing Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse. And I wanted to get into it because I wanted to be a part of that community. And I ended up sort of falling in love with performance and directing because the performances that were coming out of these games and the moments that we were the emotions that we were sharing together were so huge and so real. And the storyteller that I was working with was so good at creating those opportunities that I sort of decided that's what I wanted to do with my life.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. Let me get to Brandon. What got you into RPGs, my guy?
For me, it was pretty similar to Tennyson. I got into Vampire the Masquerade early on in high school and just kind of enjoyed the lore. And I kind of took like a different path from most people. I know it's not like people's favorite thing to hear, but D&D isn't particularly my game. Like I played a little bit of it, but I did more of the like other stuff, Cyberpunk and Shadowrun, and pretty much anything with like a tasty narrative. I kind of at least read. I'm one of those people. I've read more RPGs than I've played by like a magnitude of 100. So
Yeah, definitely can feel you on that. So you prefer more of like a narrative story as opposed to like a crunchy action combat kind of game.
for me, the mechanics are about indulging into the world. So without a world to get into, the mechanics are just math to me, you know.
Okay.
But you know, the better the world is, then the more I want to get into it. So it's like it wasn't that so much that I didn't like D&D mechanics, right? It was just that the world of D&D did not make me want to care about D&D mechanics.
Why would you say something so controversial? You have to
That's who I am.
No, that's completely understandable. And then we'll go to Jacob. Jacob, what kind of got you into role-playing games?
Trying to be a sneaky brat as a kid. So my parents had harsh screen time limits before that was a thing. So my brothers and I have 3 brothers. We'd have very limited amount of time to play video games, and a couple of them were RPGs, Super Mario RPG, Earthbound, and we needed something to do with our time when we loved those games had hit our limits. So I reverse engineered how the mechanics worked and turned it into a paper version, but I didn't know that tabletop RPGs were a thing yet. Dice never occurred to me. We used stopwatches to do timed hits.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that became a whole thing until my older brother's friend brought home books, and my parents got into the Satanic Panic. So then there was this long, several-year pause, and then got into it for real later. It's like, oh, there's real stuff.
Well, okay.
That's impressive.
Yeah, that is definitely.
That's awesome.
I would love to see you try, if you haven't already, try to bring back the stopwatch mechanic and how that would work, because that sounds super interesting to me, and also really stressful.
So it was.
I bet. It'd be a lot of me screaming the whole time. So I kind of wanted to ask, because, you know, everyone has a different kind of game that they got interested in. Is there anything that you're particularly playing or that has inspired you to kind of move on to what our next topic is going to be, which is kind of your product and your line of kind of work? So Rachel, we'll kind of start with you there.
All right, so quite frankly, I play and run a ton of D&D in a whole bunch of different settings. That's kind of my bread and butter as a DM, because it's very commonly known and it's very easily accessible for people. People are, you know, ready to sit down and play some Dungeons and Dragons, and if you pull out another game, it's much harder to get people enthusiastic about it if they don't already know a whole lot about the game. So it's a great entry-level game, and because, actually kind of what Brandon was saying, because it's not a set world, you can do pretty much anything with those rules and still have it be quote-unquote D&D.
Right.
So that's kind of, like I said, that's, I guess I would say kind of my favorite, quote-unquote, just because it's what I run all the time. But I also, you know, I really like looking at mechanics in different games. I love the Onyx Path systems, the Storyteller and Story Path systems with the D10s. I think that those are really elegant systems. And, you know, there's a ton of other things out there, mostly on the game dev side of things. I do more of the adventure building and world building.
Right.
So I don't really delve too deeply into trying to hash out the details of mechanics. So
Okay. No, that's definitely fair. So then we'll go to Tennyson, because you were talking a little bit about Jumpstart. So are you currently playing anything, and did that influence Jumpstart or one of the other RPGs that you created?
Jump Rangers, in fact.
Jump Rangers, dang it. Jump Rangers.
All
I
right.
have it written down.
So, you know, in a lot of ways, yes. And in a lot of ways, I think what I'm creating is kind of a knee-jerk reaction to the stuff that I play. I also every day, like, am communicating with people at least about Aeon Trinity, and I love the Storyteller system. I love Werewolf and Mage, especially. And I love those worlds because they're deep and because they've been very well developed. And I think Jump Rangers for me was a frustration that nobody had created something that had that level of depth and had that level of involvement,
Mhm.
and that was more geared towards inclusion when it comes to families and kids. So I wanted, because I got real mad when the Harry Potter movies came out. I felt like I got mad. I didn't
Really?
understand.
Can relate.
I didn't understand why they were as successful as they were, apart from the core appeal of the world. So I started breaking down why that worked. And I think the thing that makes Harry Potter so astoundingly viral is the fact that you're giving the kid the wand, and the kid has the empowerment in that situation. And I'd created a couple of other tabletop role-playing games up until that point. I'd done a lot of world building, and I was happy with what I'd done, but it wasn't really going to set the world on fire. And that idea that I should be giving the wand to the kid and letting them make the decisions and letting them decide the course of this world struck me as very powerful. So Jump Rangers is that idea, but with all of my fetishes.
Oh.
And
Madison, don't say fetishes and kids.
Right. but creatively, that's what we use to keep ourselves invested in something, is the things that we're interested in, is what I'm really
Right.
saying.
Oh, for
You've
sure.
got to put a hook in there just to keep your attention.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so it's about Kid Space Commandos after we've been literally just brushed aside by an alien civilization of giant dinosaurs that has invaded our world and taken it over and is strip mining it clean. We can't hope to survive except as basically bed bugs. We're on the bottom of the evolution scale at this point. We have to infect little corners of their world and sneak aboard their motherships and then infest the planets that they live on. And that's how grown-ups are living, is with this very ragtag rebel alliance kind of, but being small and adaptable is the key to survival. So you've got these kids who are realizing the power that gives them, and they're sneaking aboard these alien spaceships and finding a way to fight back and finding a way to keep communities and colonies tied together, finding new worlds to explore. And the whole system is built around that empowerment. Now, there's other big aliens too. There's big giant robots and big giant bugs, and we're the small ones is kind of the whole visual gimmick of. But down to the mechanics, I wanted to create a game and a universe that made it self-evident that individual kids have the power to determine their own destiny and the destiny of those around them. And right down to the game mechanics, I think that's something we've achieved. I'm pretty excited about it. And that's not, I can't point to Werewolf and say,
Okay, that's but it definitely came out of that need and that desire, like you said, to do a family inclusion kind of product, because you don't really have that in the RPG world. It's usually like, I mean, you can kind of access through D&D, but there isn't a lot of things that are specifically for that product. So that's
I wanted a sense of play. I wanted a big sense of play in my game.
enough. That's perfectly fair. Let me move to Brandon. Brandon, so tell me a little bit about, are you currently playing anything, or are you focused solely on Swords Fall?
No, not really playing anything. Man, to be honest, even before I got into Swords Fall, I hadn't really been playing anything in a while. So for me, I don't know if it's like controversial as a quote unquote RPG writer, but I don't really think about tabletops per se when I write or I create. I don't particularly think about any one element. I usually think about like I come from more of a video game background.
Okay.
I did a little moonlighting once upon a time and all that kind of stuff. So I think more in terms of like core gameplay loops, but not like in a boring way. Like in a when you sum up how to tell your friends what the game is, like what's the stuff you talk about, you know what I mean? Because that's the stuff that drives that, like what's the oomph. So I usually just think about that when it comes to that. So I try to stay away from certain stuff just because even if you don't want to, an idea gets in your head. And it's not so much about copying an idea, but you'd be surprised how much being exposed to certain stuff, like your subconscious is thinking about it, either says yes or no, and now this design might have been from that versus what you wanted it to be. So I try to keep things organic because that's kind of my brand per se. I want it to feel like you walked into a world that's living and breathing and very, You know, like how sometimes, especially I think about this in terms of video games, it feels like you're in a world, but somehow the world is an island, and it's like
Yes.
nothing else technically exists, but it sort of does. But maybe catch time next episode, Dragon Ball Z sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've just never been a big fan of that. I kind of hate when they're like, "Hey, we discovered a whole continent randomly." So instead, I sat down to just make the whole box, and then I go, "Cool, there's all this stuff over there. There's some stuff over here, and we can talk about that." But right now, we're over here, and it works a little bit better that way for me, at least. You know?
No, I mean, going on because you use World Anvil, right, for all of your kind of stuff.
I use it for like to display it for people more or less. You know,
Gotcha.
like I have like my own way that I arrange it, like internally.
Mhm.
But for something like War Anvil, I had my ultimate idea was sort of how can I show people a world that's in development? Because
Mhm.
that's sometimes the hard part about being like, especially if you're a writer, like people expect the book, so it's kind of all or nothing. And I wanted it to have a sort of feels like a community building, but really it's more like the building is you watching me build the house that you get to come into, and every day you're like, yeah, this house is looking real good, Brandon. I'm like, yeah, tomorrow there's gonna be gold fountains, and that's and World Anvil is kind of how I like display it so people can see it. But basically, World Anvil is like the stuff I want you to see, but there's so much stuff behind the scenes that
Oh,
I have like a decade worth of a plan, so I'll be here for a while.
thank you. Hell yeah. I'm about that. And then Jacob, are you currently playing anything? Are you currently what's kind of your direction of that?
At the moment, the only thing I'm playing is a weekly D&D game. I've been a little light on involvement in gaming due to job hunting right now, but getting from consumer to creator, and even how I decide what to create in the meantime is often driven by being frustrated with something.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was starting to gradually get pissed off about Pathfinder, and that drove me to being like, well, I could probably make something better. And I started peeling layer after layer off of that system and seeing like, what do we actually need? And eventually ended up publishing my first indie game, which was like so far in the opposite direction from Pathfinder First Edition that there's not even a mechanical concept of challenge.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like extremely light touch storytelling prompts, and most people don't like the game. The handful that do are super into it. And then from there I switched to 5th edition D&D and started filling gaps there. Like I've published an intelligence-based martial class. I've published a compendium of elemental spells. Enough that you can like pick one element and go from 1 to 20 without ever learning an off-theme spell.
Well, shit.
Because there's always something that's like, people are trying to do this and they can't. I should make it so you can. And so that's what most of my creation has been for the past 2 years.
Yeah. No. I've seen that through your DM's guild. It looks like you have a lot of different, not just like subclasses. They're literal classes. Like I was checking out the Slayer class because I'm a huge Buffy nerd. I'm like, is this like this? And then it's not. It's a whole bunch of different awesome things that you've implemented.
Although if you pick the Ghost Killer subclass of the Slayer, then you'll be in that ballpark.
Oh, I've been eyeing it. I might be playing it. Shane, we'll talk later. So I kind of wanted to kind of move into, because we talked a little bit about the mechanics, we talked a little bit about the gaming and a little bit about influences, but I wanted to kind of dive in a little bit deeper. We have a little bit more of a diverse, I would say, panel than previous to an extent. So I kind of wanted to ask, how have any of your personal experiences influenced your work? What is your process to, I think we touched about upon a little bit, which was, the need as opposed to what wasn't being released by kind of these bigger companies. So Rachel, go ahead and why don't you start that off for me?
Okay, so one of the things that has really kind of like, I guess, kind of influenced my work that I've really kind of tried to bring out across both my GMing and my my writing stuff has been just kind of an increased better representation within the games. So basically, like, if you go back to old school like AD&D, It's you go through the art in that, and it's you have these big strong men in armor, and then you have these women in like nothing, and not that it's not beautiful art, but at the same time, that kind of attitude of like kind of women being invisible in gaming has been kind of a pervasive theme, and I see it, in the groups that I run for at our game shop, where usually we'll have maybe we'll have a woman in our group, but it's going to be one out of 8 players. It's just it's very hard for women to get involved in the first place, and I think part of that is not seeing themselves in the games, and that also extends to obviously other groups as well. In my writing, I try to be really good with gender non-traditional characters. I try to make sure that I include queer characters in my writing, just so that there are characters who represent those people who exist in our community, and ideally who represent them without that being the core feature of the character. Because it's great to have, for example, a gay character in your book, but if the plot point is that this character is gay, they have then been reduced to nothing more than their status on that like one issue. So they're not really a fully fleshed out character, and they're not representative of the actual people in the gaming community who I want to feel welcome, included, and enthusiastic about games. So
No, that's perfectly fair. That's why I kind of wanted to bring it up, because I know just for myself in particular, being of Hispanic descent, I'm a huge comic book nerd. We didn't really have a lot of Spanish superheroes. We had maybe Zorro and Bane, and they made Bane Tom Hardy. So I totally get that from that standpoint. Let me go to Tennyson. So tell me a little bit about kind of what your world experiences have been and how that has influenced you.
Well, I think this is a familiar story to anybody who's read my Patreon, but when I was really little, my play was to try and get my sister and my cousins to go outside with me and play Space Kids and do role playing and be adventurers on other planets, and I just got so caught up in the details of it that I think they all got tired and frustrated and went to do other things. So it was exciting for me to discover role playing in the first place, because it sort of felt like an outlet for them. And I think very clearly that's exactly what Jump Rangers is, like to a T, is that game that I was trying to get my family to play with. So there's that. So there's the like sad little nerd element of what I'm doing.
It's fulfilling that fantasy as a child.
Yeah, I think so. And at the same time, everything everybody else is saying is true, and it's not my place to necessarily contribute anything to that conversation so much as listen right here, but in having the opportunity to create an entire world, I think every single one of us is completely account for the degree to which we not just celebrate underrepresented people, but also the degree to which we celebrate represented people. Dismantling power systems is a pendulum, and I personally believe you've got to push hard on that pendulum if you're going to get it to move. So we've all seen what, frankly, Nazi geek culture is capable of. We've all seen Gamergate. We've all seen the shitstorm that our entire community has been frankly complicit in. So it's a choose sides situation. There's no apolitical version of that. You either are going to try and fix that problem, or you're going to allow it to continue. And for me, there's no choice there. So, my development coordinator likes to talk about the inclusiveness of Jump Rangers, and I appreciate it. There's other people who can speak to that more clearly than me here today. Very, very, very clearly. Like, if you read the book, you'll know where I stand on these issues. And I'm here to make kids feel safe being who they are, not who we want them to. And adults too. It's all it's a story. It's a book about empowerment. What do you think I'm doing?
That's fair. Definitely fair. That's awesome. Yeah. I wanted to, and then yeah, I'll hit it to Brandon. So what kind of influenced you and through your personal experiences and kind of influenced your work in that regard?
That's kind of like a trick question for me because, like, as a black person in America, you really don't have a choice. Like everything, you know, like, and I think that's one of the things that I've sort of been a part of blowing out of the water when it comes to communities. There's a lot of things that people don't like to talk about, and I think the biggest one is that people forget that just because of the way the country is, my life automatically is different from even someone who lives in the same town on the same street, right? And so when I write, I always write from that perspective. So every single character, the setting, I mean, everything about it comes from those experiences of being like a black person in America. And not just that, but like a black nerd in America who is into all the same stuff that the people who are in Comicsgate end up being in. So you end up having a life where everything you're into, you look over, there's a Nazi. So, you know, I mean, you kind of learn to weave in between the lines. And so I take those things and I put that in my writing, and things like in Swords Fall, we have different kinds of bards, not just a bard. So one of them is Jalen's, which are basically rappers. And then so for me, it was about when I looked at my game and was like, okay, how do I want to do my world? How do I want to do these elements? I knew that I just didn't want to take what was there and copy it, because it is the fact that a lot of the things that people do like in D&D also come from colonialism. And then so for me, I wanted to do away with the whole thing and think about it in a new way that came from maybe more of identity that I like, that I'm for, you know what I mean? So I tried to do, in a weird way, I'm trying to do the same thing anime did to America. You know what I mean? Because anime has done a really good job of confusing a whole bunch of people into liking stuff that they really have a hard time. When I mean, it's funny because, like, I mean, I'm an anime kid, right? But even sometimes when you hang out with other anime people, you're like, why did you say that word? Did you have to use Chan at the end? Why? Like, can we pause and examine this? You know, so, you know, but when you think about it, it's because it's tied to these elements that are so cool that you want to learn more about them. So my goal with Swords Fall was always to do the same thing. I want to give people a sense of respect for something like rap, because the mechanics of rap is actually difficult. People can mock rap, but there's a reason why everybody cannot rap. It is an actual skill, learning a cipher using those things. So I really sat down, and I actually sat down and like really researched how people rap. Like I legit listened to interviews, like read about it, and just kind of thought about how would we do this in a game system. And that's what I turned that class into. So for me, it was definitely about taking like my culture, but then adding in all the normal nerd stuff that we do day to day, you know, all the normal stuff, and taking the stuff that you love. And like Tennyson said, you know, taking the things that you really like and also making it accessible to other people. That was me, because I think that one of the struggles that happens with minorities is that, sure, you can make your own stuff, but then everybody else wants to avoid it. They're like, well, like, that wasn't made for us. But it's like, well, I mean, but does it have to be made for you? Yeah. So also with Swords Fall, I'm trying to kind of trick people. Like my goal, and especially if you've seen the art, I want it to be so cool that you're kind of like, I don't want to be the only one not looking at this and playing this. And that's how I want people to get more into the history of stuff, because there's a lot of Easter eggs in it, you know, and I take Easter eggs from Black culture and African culture, and I put that in the game. So just like with anime, you start getting into something and all of a sudden you're like, man, I really want to know more about this. And my goal is that happens as well, you know? So for me, like every single thing that I write, every single thing that I do definitely 100% comes from like my culture. And I really actually embrace that rather than feel weird about it. I'm like, yeah, let me show you my perspective of this stuff that I think is equally cool.
I think Rachel, you said you had a question for Brandon. Go ahead and
yeah. So I have kind of had Swordsfall on my radar for basically since you did your Kickstarter for that. Because like it's something that was a huge deal within a lot of the gaming communities that I'm part of because they're very heavily into representation and inclusion. And we all thought it was super cool. And honestly, like I didn't know I was going to be on a show with you until like, an hour ago. So, but my question for you is from a GM perspective, where I'm often trying to get people enthusiastic about trying something new. What would you as the game designer want communicated to potential players to try and get them interested in trying out a game like yours?
In a way, I don't want Swordfall treated differently than any other game. Like for me, I don't, and this is gonna sound odd, so I want to explain it in full. I don't really ever want to see Swordsfall in the urban or Black or African American section, because as a writer and other people, I can tell you that's where things tend to die. So my goal is that the culture part is just a part of it, just as much as we don't have to sit there and explain to the group why we're going to play Oriental Adventures. People just do it. And my goal is that Swordsfall is the same way. It is in itself a world in a game, and everything that I want you to know, I write in it. So the only way that people can go wrong in Swordsfall is if they bring their outside stuff with it. And I'm a philosophy major, so I'm not gonna lie. That is the bit of the trap. Like it is the thing that makes you reflect it. You do not have to bring in accents or any outside cultural knowledge. All that stuff is baked in to the point to where I tell you. So if anything, I think I want it to be like when you have a weird feeling or a question, it's really more a reflection of how you've been raised in the society to see it versus how I'm presenting it to you. And that sort of confusion of that's sort of the breaking from the how you've been taught versus the a minority perspective, if that makes sense, Like, is there's really nothing extra that you have to know, like, because a lot of things that come from a minority view is just a respect. It just feels like sometimes there's a lack of respect for when you say things. The nice thing about me and my game is you don't have a choice. You bought it. You have to listen to me now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
I got you.
Automatically half the problem is solved, So and Summon of Kings is a game I just released, and it's a classic example. You don't really have to have any outside knowledge. I tell you what's in it. So when I get certain questions, I'm like, but where does it say that in the game? And they're like, so I don't have to actually do the rap? I'm like, do you have to actually stab someone when you roll in D&D? It's like, I mean, if you want it to be realistic like that, go for it. But I just want you to get into the vibe of it and the spirit of it, just like, we get into the concept of old-timey bards and, throwing a coin for your Witcher. Like we say that with like a sort of fun and reverence, but then when we get to like a rap song, then we kind of dunk it like it has no respect, even though it hits the same chord. It can be just as fun, just as silly, just as random, but we just put this extra slant on it for no reason. And that's what I want people to get into their head, like that feeling of, oh, this is just fun and just cool. Why did I think so weird about it? And that's the extra lesson. That's like the free lesson from me to them. So really, I just tell everybody, just treat it like any other game. Treat it like you're playing Star Wars or D&D. I don't want to see any extra weird stuff. Just take it as I tell it to you. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of the things that I didn't just decide to do an African-based property. I really sat down and did research and read and thought not just about what I want to show, but how I want to show it and how I want to be respectful to a culture that I come from, but I don't live, but also a culture that a part of me is like, I really want more in my life. So it is carefully designed in a way that like is meant to be kind of like carefree. Just buy it and enjoy it and read it cover to cover and just take it in. And I feel like everything's good.
So I actually, because you started touching upon it, because what did you have like an aha moment when you were like, I need to make this?
Black Panther.
Black Panther.
I mean, that was, I could tell you, like, I mean, and people hear it, and I think, like, I can hear people, they repeat it, like, oh yeah, Black Panther was really important. And I'm like, I don't think you really, 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 really get it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
up until that point, and I've really had to sit down and thought about it and looked it up. It was the first time in a major movie, right, with like a real budget, where they felt like everything in there was authentically Black, not a stereotype, not what someone thought Black was, or not what someone wanted to show Black. Like, they just invited a whole bunch of Black people and we just made some stuff. And it was just, it hit me in a way that I'd never been hit before. You know, it's like when you've been away from home for a while and you go home and you get that taste of home cooking, and you don't even remember why home cooking was good until you're eating it, and then there's just tears and there's pie and you're just like, this is the best thing ever. It was like that. And it was that kind of like, oh yeah, this is what the experience we've never been able to have, when we've really been able to make an experience that reflected us in a way that enlightened and pumped us up. And at the time, it wasn't like, haha, I'm gonna go make swords fall, but it sat with me, you know, like it was just one of those things that in the back of your head, and you're just kind of like, and what really, my aha moment, and I remember because it's kind of goofy, I was coming out of the Burger King drive-thru, right? I just got off of work, like, and I was too lazy to go home and cook. And I got some food, and I was like, "This is ridiculous. I'm tired of this. I need something to do." And I'm literally driving home, and I was like, "I'm just gonna make a random RPG and call my friends and make them come hang out with me." Like, that was just that was that. And then by the time I got home, I was like, "Well, if I'm gonna do it, I may as well like do it right, you know." And then the next day, I was like, "Well, if I'm gonna do it right, I may as well like not put colonialization in it." And the next day it was like, well, if I'm gonna not put colonialization in it, I may as well. And it was just day after day, it was that. And then now we're here, and that's
awesome.
that.
Best ideas
No,
come from
that's
Burger King
fantastic.
drive-thrus.
And then let me get to Jacob. So Jacob, tell me a little bit about how your personal experiences influence your game creations, like with Journey Away, with Launch, I believe, which I think is super interesting. Could you elaborate on that for me?
So I touched on a little bit earlier that Journey Away was kind of an experiment, and I started in the D&D section of the hobby and started peeling away layers until I eventually got to, do we even need challenge, or can we just prompt ourselves to tell stories? And so Journey Away ended up being just sort of stretching what I knew about game design. Launch was specifically for a game jam. I had never done one before and thought I'd try it. We were supposed to make a very, very short game in a short amount of time that had to do with the anime mecha genre, but was not about combat. And so I came up with something about death and loss instead. And then in the D&D stuff, it was, I guess, during my time in Pathfinder, which is where I spent the bulk of my time before switching to D&D 5th edition, I accumulated a lot of negative experiences in that community.
Really?
Yeah. I was playing mostly an organized play, and there were some elements of the leadership culture, both locally to me and in the higher ups, that supported, propped up, and protected some pretty nasty behaviors and mindsets. And that, combined with recognizing some inherent flaws in the system, maybe just like, I want something better, because I was too in love with RPGs at that point to just throw away the entire hobby. So I just like, okay, I got to do something better. And that carried over into Journey Away. It carried over into trying to fill gaps in 5th edition content by just wanting people to be able to do what they want to do and have it work. It also filtered into, I have a work in process game that I sort of came up with while I was still peeling layers away to do Journey Away, but I kind of liked another system that I made along the way, set it aside, and I'm kind of coming back to it. That's more, a little bit more all-purpose than D&D, less combat focused, more just like all challenges are handled the same way.
Oh, cool.
So that you can do things with less work, less math, and with more flexibility. So I guess looking back on it, my entire design and publishing journey has been about saying like, well, you really ought to be able to do this and not have to do this. So I'll make that happen.
I also wanted to ask, what is Aether of Adhara?
Aether of Adhara is the work in progress system I just mentioned. So when I was doing Journey Away, I kind of came up with a world and had an idea of kind of how the magic in that world works. And I kind of touched on it a little bit in Journey Away, but Journey Away is very much make up your own stuff. So there's kind of just like little seeds for you to work with. And I wanted to at some point get back to that world and develop it more and have a game specifically set in that world. It's still a long way off because like I've got kind of the core system, but I haven't been able to sink a lot of time into world building lately. Plus I'm juggling other game design stuff like my D&D work and all that.
Drop it.
Who said that?
But also looking for a day job to stay alive, so there's that.
They have different things.
That's fair. Making money and eating is always a good thing.
But the hope someday is to have Aether of Adhara be a game about the idea with the world is that it was a non-magical world, then magic got added, and in Journey Away, that means that within about a generation or two after people started freaking out that magic existed, people were more comfortable with the idea and realized that now like the entire world has been altered, and so there's all these wonders that you might not have even imagined, and so you're journeying out of your own village to go see what things you could witness that no one's ever seen before. So it's very much a lighthearted, upbeat game about going out and witnessing wonders. Then Aether of Adhara would be a little bit later when rich people get a hold of magic and try and take control of it and start establishing that like it's like wrong or barbaric to shape the ether with your bare hands and just do magic. You need to be using these wands and staves that we manufacture and going to our expensive schools to learn how to do it. And if you don't, that's bad and wrong, and people should see you as dangerous. And so then the protagonists would presumably be people who just use their hands and try and fight back against that and get people to understand like, hey, you could be helping your crops or whatever with magic using this ether that is literally in the air around you. You do it. You don't have to pay tribute to these people who want to be in control of everything.
That's awesome. I love that. I also wanted to see, how are we doing on time for you, Brandon?
All right, we're doing good. Man.
Okay, because I know you gotta leave at some point, so I wanted to check in to see how you're doing before we move on. Okay. All right. So I wanted to move on to obviously when you're making these, there's got to be a lot of collaboration as far as who makes the art for these, or marketing and things that I don't even know because I am a very ignorant just man. So I kind of wanted to Michael, don't laugh at that. I wanted to kind of ask what your collaboration, like, what do you look for in a person? I know, Rachel, that you're like a jack of all trades. You do like a whole bunch of stuff where you collab with people and then people collab with you. And I want to see what your kind of like your expansion on that and kind of what you look for.
Sure. So, as far as people collaborating with me, because that's the easy part, that's a lot of like other people who have a system or publishers who have a game who I, for one reason or another, end up in touch with and putting together content for. So that's less me looking for them and more them, liking things that I've done and giving me more work, which is awesome.
Always a fun
But
time.
yeah, exactly. There's also a level of like, I want to write for games that represent, the things that I feel strongly about. So like I
Mhm.
want to write for games. Like I'm super enthusiastic about writing for games that have good representation in them. Um, so that's always a perk when I can do that.
For sure.
And obviously, not every game is going to be that, and it doesn't mean that it's not a good game. So that's part of it too.
Mhm.
As far as me collaborating with other people, a lot of times what I'll look for is like honestly, the big things for me are, you know, if I'm reaching out to work with someone else, I want to know that they have a good project plan in place, that it's kind of established that like they have a plan and a timeline and we're actually going to get this to completion.
Mhm.
That's probably the single biggest thing. um just, you know, the assurance that this isn't just going to die halfway through after I put in a lot of work on it.
Right.
Beyond that, people's abilities to hit deadlines, which is kind of related to that, is a huge thing. Like if like obviously life happens, and you know, especially right now, everybody's life is up in the air. And deadlines are just like my own deadlines that I've been trying to meet just keep getting pushed back because you know, I ended up doing a ton of extra hours at work before we closed our office because of COVID. So, you know, obviously like stuff happens and I get that, but just, you know, the ability to treat the gaming side of things as something that you are doing as a professional endeavor is something that I really value in people I work with.
Mhm.
Because a lot of people will look at it and say, this is a fun project that I'm doing and I'm doing it for fun. And that's a very different approach than this is a fun project that I'm doing, but I'm doing it as a project with a set final professional goal.
Right.
So really just kind of trying to get a feel for which side of that people fall on is probably one of the biggest struggles I run into in collaborating with other people, and one of the most important things that I try to sort out.
No, so I know that you do something called the creative circle. Does that kind of play into that? And I know it's a place for showcasing, but do you use that to also kind of scout out collaborative partners with or people with similar goals to you?
So the Creator Circle newsletter is pretty much entirely, well, it started out entirely as a way to let DMs Guild content creators connect with each other.
Mhm.
So my work on that is pretty much kind of just like I take everybody's submissions and like put them together into a nice concise newsletter every week. But it does, you know, it is kind of cool in that it lets me see who is regularly putting stuff out, you know, who is consistently creating projects, and, you know, doesn't really let me gauge, you know, deadlines and things like that. But if I know that somebody has had, you know, 4 projects that they've put out over the past year that have been like solid collaborations, you know, I'm going to feel pretty comfortable about jumping on their
Mhm.
next project, obviously.
No, that entirely makes sense. No, that's awesome. Uh, Tennyson, where do you kind of look for a collaborative partner? I think there might have been someone that we both know that you might be working with, or
Yes.
yeah, can you expand on that for me?
Yes. During the last table topics, I got to know an artist by the name of P.
P-Man.
And yeah, P. Mal's agreed to come on board Jump Rangers as our art director, which is
wow.
extremely, yes, it's
Awesome.
extremely exciting. Thank you. It's going to be a slow ramp up because we need to build our subscribership in order to pay her, and she does deserve to get paid. So I'm not. There's going to be a couple of sketches that I'm going to pay for in the meantime, and we're going to develop basically a show bible for the world, so that we can, you know, approach it from an organized place. We're going to use the time that we have while I'm building the fundraising as effectively as possible, and then we're going to be getting, once we hit our goal of $550 a month, we're going to be between 3 and 5 pieces of artwork a month, which is fantastic. And then the goal is to build from there, get a couple of more artists on the payroll, and build a unified, centralized look. Generally speaking, I come from theater and film. I've been collaborating with people since I was a kid, and I it's my responsibility to create something that people want to be a part of. And part of that is being responsible for the money. And I got to say right now, Brandon has had an outstanding track record of ethics on that regard. It's about giving people the support they need to know that they are doing the absolute best that they can. Nobody wants to spend their time fixing other people's mistakes, in other words, whether the mistake is not having the resources they need to do their job effectively, or whether the mistake is a lack of craft or other flaws in the project that they need to go and repair instead of focusing on building on a strong foundation. No one wants to feel like they're constantly swimming uphill. So that was not a good metaphor.
No,
But you understand.
upstream.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, it's accurate. I don't want to swim
I am a
uphill.
traumatic brain injury survivor, so that's the thing we all just live with and roll. But it's my job to create a world and to create a system and to create content that I want to be a part of. And if you're not finding those collaborations, work harder.
Mhm.
Building your community is about providing other people with the strength to be excellent. And then once you've achieved that, it's really important that you don't work with people who do not share that ethic. You've got to work with people who scare you. You've got to work with people you think you don't deserve to work with. Like, that's it.
That's
If you-
literally what this is right now. So
if you can build the content that attracts those people, if you can build the craft within yourself to maintain those relationships, and then you keep earning those people's trust by getting better at what you do, you challenge them to be better at what they do, they stay scared and hungry and excited about the work that they're doing, and everybody keeps growing and everyone's excited about the next day. That's how you keep really creative people involved.
mhm.
And anything less is a weakness on your part.
No, that's definitely
That's it.
fair. No, that's definitely fair.
So that's it. I mean, and then support those people, give them the resources they need to succeed, pay them for their work, all, and don't look for someone to pull you up. Always be pulling other people up, and then look for people who do the same thing, and you will create an inevitable success.
No, I completely agree. And I think, like, what do I say to that? But I think P Mal is going to do a great job as your art director. Like, her stuff is really, really clean, and it's got
Yes.
such a distinct style that it would look great for Jump Rangers. So I'm really excited to see what you guys kind of come up with that.
Again, I wanted a real strong sense of play in everything that the game involves, and I've been role playing my whole life. I love tabletop role playing games, and it was a great place for me to start my on this universe. But obviously, I'm thinking about other kinds of content, and I want something that feels good as a toy. I want something that feels good as cartoons and movies
Mhm.
and comic books. And on the one hand, PMAL has a fascination with transmedia, which is great for both of us. All of the influences that we've discussed about the game so far are like Avatar: Last Airbender to StarCraft. It's all animation that we're thinking about. So we haven't even really stopped to talk about static, funny enough. But but I want it, I want that sense of play. I want to be able to create toys, and she's got such an exquisite sense of specificity in the work. And at the same time, she's always got that sense of openness and invitation and play. And you bring those two things together, and you're going to have just an emotional complexity, and at the same time, a welcoming,
Yeah.
that's what I want. So I think we're going to arrive at something distinct, unique, specifically Jump Rangers. And I think hopefully it's a collaboration that's going to change the culture. That's
an awesome goal to have. No, that's such an awesome goal to have. Once again, I don't like. What else do I say that besides that's awesome? If you're playing the drinking game at home, drink every time I say okay, or that's awesome. Because
well, what you could. I mean, if you've read the game and you agree with the fact that I'm on that track, let me know. And if you think I'm off base, I'd love to hear people's responses. We've made the core book to Jump Rangers because it is, as as Swordsfall said, it's a work in progress. We're developing it as we go. This is our solution to the problem of publishing is the Patreon, because we can be so free in how we approach it. We can put a comic book out, and it's not like it's just all going on the same server. It's still more content. It's world. So come in and get to know the universe, and here's the rules that make it work. If people get to know the core book and they find that we're off base, like, talk to me, let me know what's going on, because these are the people that are willing to actually play with this universe. They're actually creating characters and creating a piece of themselves in it. So no matter where we go with this content, this audience is always going to be the audience that cares the most. And I want to make sure that I mean, I don't always agree. I'll have my own ideas, but to make it a strong community, like, I want to make sure that I'm cherry picking the best observation. So throw them at me, please.
That's awesome. Wow, damn it. I gotta go. Brandon, do you want to talk about your collaboration process while I get a drink? I will be right back, actually. But yeah, Brennan, if you wanted to kind of open up your collaboration process, because you have an unofficial soundtrack for the game. You have a whole bunch of art for the game.
I have an unofficial soundtrack. I also have official music too. So
please
take that.
Expand on. Give me. I gotta go. Yeah, expand on all that. Just ignore me. What is this?
So for me, when it comes to collaboration, I'm probably on not like the harder side per se, but I tend to not look at it so much as collaboration as either I'm hiring you to do a job or you're hiring me to do a job. I don't mean that in a callous way, but I mean that in there's a strict rules that we're here for. You know what I mean? It is still a job. Someone has to get paid. So I like to get those things out the way early because I don't really want anyone to have to worry about that stuff. You know what I mean? And I think that when it comes to, I guess for me, it's easier to talk about because I've lately, especially, I've been more on the employer side, right? Especially considering we have like 28 artists all together right now that I have working on the 3 different things we have going on. And I've learned that working with people is always a varied thing. Like, I mean, I've done a lot of different like management and project management, like in my own personal life before this, but it's the first time I've worked with artists, especially like in the RPG world. And for me, I've learned that you have to treat freelancers differently than you would in like a more structured world, right? Because you're not just hiring their talent, you're hiring their mind. And like Rachel said, like in a way, like work ethic, because some people define fun as 2 different things. So it's like, hey, I mean, I say Swordsfall is fun, but this is also my career and lifeblood. So there, I have to get a sense that someone is going to have that level of seriousness, and one of the reasons why my art seems to be really top notch, which, it really is mainly just because I took the time to handpick. So every single artist on my team is someone who I've sat there and stalked, so like, I totally understand, like, you got to find out who you're getting, right? So, I mean, I go through their catalog and I look at their art, so I found Tumo because I was going through Pinterest, which if you're looking, as a tip, if people are looking for art, Pinterest is the best place to find art. I don't know why this doesn't get talked about more in the community. I think because, honestly, I'm going to be real, I think it's sexism. I think people hear Pinterest, they think women, and their mind turns off, and they forget that a company realized that, hey, images need their own different search algorithm. So literally, if you want to get nerdy about it, Pinterest has the best image algorithm out there. It will find better pictures related to your search words than anything else. So I started using that to find more Black characters when I was starting to come up with Swordsfall, and I needed sort of references for myself. And through that, I found a piece of fan art that Tumo, my lead artist, had made for Black Panther, right? So I was like, oh, well, yeah, like it kind of just clicked for me. And I started looking at his other art, and I'm like, okay, I like his style, right? So I wanted to find people who had a style that I already knew that I personally liked, not just in terms of, well, how much does it cost or whatnot? I wanted it to be somebody that I was like, yeah, that would be something that I would want to own. And then it's just a matter of, okay, making sure that we're on the same page. And I don't always like to assume that someone has a certain kind of a work ethic or whatnot. I usually set that as my expectation. Like, hey, we have like a hard limit here or a soft limit here or no limit. I just want the prettiest art possible, but don't disappear for 3 weeks on me, please. Like I just try to communicate. And then most of the time my biggest criteria for collaboration is a bit like Tennyson said, it's someone who has an actual enjoyment in your world. And for me, for what I do in Swordsfall, that's super important to me. Like in a bigger way, like the best way to work with me is to show that you're a fan, because I can see that in the work. I need someone who isn't just doing it to, pay the bills. And there's no hate there, but I want more than pay the bills work. So I need to find people who are willing to do that and find that in my project. I think that's something that a lot of freelancers don't do sometimes. They don't either try to get people into the project, or they might be afraid of it, or worse off, afraid to move on if someone seems to be kind of lukewarm on your project. Because lukewarm reaction, especially if you're talking about art, you will get lukewarm art. That's just kind of how the human mind works. That's why, like, especially with my artists, like a lot of them will walk away from a piece and come back later. You know what I mean? Because if you really care about a piece, sometimes you can't push it. You just got to come back when, I don't know, your brain decides it's time, So while I'm not an artist, I try to keep that in mind when I collaborate. I try to remember what their job is, like, so that I can make sure that I'm giving them that space, that latitude and whatnot. Because, like, for instance, if I'm working with a writer, right? And maybe this is because I'm a writer, right? But I feel like with a writer, you got to be like, hey, writer, it's Tuesday. How's it going? Like, oh yeah, because I don't know. Sometimes like the writer thing, and then you're like, okay, sit down and bang this out. But with an artist, sometimes you can get the opposite response, because sometimes that feeling of pressure, just you don't get bad art, but there's just a vibe you get when the artist was in their happy place with that piece, or sad place with a sad. Like they were in the right spot for the piece. You just feel it, and sometimes I just let them do their thing, and I'll take like 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm like, hey, I'm super excited to see what you're working on. Just letting you know. Have a good day. So it's just like, sometimes collaboration is just kind of remembering that it's people, but also like what their job is, so that you can mesh into that. Because like for me, as someone who's hiring them, like that's kind of my job. My job is to like facilitate you in whatever the stuff we're doing, because that's why we're exchanging money, right? Like I want to get the most bang for my buck. You want to get the most bang for your buck. Like we can both get that, and and my situation a little bit different because the Kickstarter did so well. It allowed me to actually be able to get an artist and say, hey, how much? And they're like, what? I'm like, no, how much? Like, I don't like, they're like, well, no. I was like, I'm really not debating. Like, I'm not haggling you. How much for you to do this piece, like in a real good way that you feel great about? What's that number? I want to pay that. And then you get good things. And it's something that, like, with the way that money is skewed, is something that people can't really do. And trust me, I'm super not wealthy at all. But, like, there's also an understanding that money is still the best form of encouragement. So for me, doing my Kickstarter was a way to be able to empower that, right? And then if you look at my Kickstarter, I made it obvious, like, hey, this tier, we get this artist with this much money, because of the fact that, hey, I can say that here's the budget, have artwork, and I get to just, we both get to have that relief. No one has to worry about it. I have it. I'm going to give it to you. Let's talk about art. And that's been one of the things that's gotten Swordsfall looking so good, is there's kind of like guilt-free art, I guess you could say. Like, I don't want to make a new buzzword like cage-free, guilt-free art. No artists were harmed in the production of this book. But I got on the real, like, there's no crunch time. I'm pretty chill about dates, because I also know that people know that I'm a hustler, and as long as people know that, like, your boss works hard, you don't feel bad about working hard. So I think that's important to any collaboration. I don't know if this sounds egotistical, but like in a collaboration, I try to work harder than that. Like, that's always my goal. Like, however hard you're working, I want to work harder. Like, not necessarily competition, but I want to show that, like, I'm pulling my weight, and maybe a hint at, are you? Like, just playfully, but there has to be that sense of energy, So Other than that, on the flip side, as far as collaborating with me, I don't know. I don't really get a lot of requests. I like to think that I'm easy to deal with. I mean, I've gotten a few, but I mean, I don't do D&D, and I'm kind of at the point where I'm like, I want to do something fun and probably diverse. So if I can't do that in a project, I can't really give you my 100%. And me ego-wise wants to give 100%. So like, if I can do it my way, sure. But other than that, no. Pay your people. I mean, I feel like that's the general thing we've been hitting on. But in a real way, sometimes the best way collaboration is just to get everything out, like the uncomfortable parts, deadlines, dates, payment, stuff like especially if you're talking about art, which I do a lot, which I count. I feel like for RPGs is that big thing. Stuff like if there's a size requirement, or if you know who you're printing through, what their printing requirements are, because stuff like CMYK will make your whole life a bad day when it comes to printing. It's easy to overlook that. So if you can give this to an artist beforehand, all that makes your life easier.
No, that's fair. Definitely fair. And then I wanted to get to Jacob as well as far as collaboration, because you have a lot of things on DM's Guild that just has gorgeous artwork with it, like your Spore Servants and your Elemental spell book. I saw a bit of things there while I was researching as well. So how is your kind of collaborative process in that regard? How do you kind of search people out for that?
So actually, part of the reason I'm on the DM's Guild is because I can't afford to pay artists. And on the DM's Guild, there's packs of Wizards of the Coast art that they make available specifically for use in DM's Guild products. So I'm able to, through that and some searching through like Creative Commons art, and occasionally I can find a really good piece of stock art at a decent price. Then I'm able to put together something that looks nice on my basically non-existent budget and get something put together. So for my D&D work, it's pretty much all self-published, just solo published, just me working on it. Except Curse Classes, I was asked to be the freelancer on that. I did one of the classes in it. Somebody else was running the project. But then all the stuff that was just purely my own designs, I gathered art that was freely or cheaply available. I did all the layout, all the writing, everything. Which is scary because as a general rule, like, you should hire editors, but I didn't. I was able to hire some people for Journey Away, because that had a Kickstarter, which I think honestly half the reason that even funded was that I shelled out up front for the cover art, which is gorgeous. Emily Chow does amazing work for a vibrant, happy, colorful style. But I haven't done that very much because I'm poor and always have been.
That's fair. That's definitely
that
fair.
said, once you have funds to work with, like after the Kickstarter, like I 100% would reiterate what Brandon said. Like, don't haggle the price. Like, tell artists what you want. Ask if they're interested. Ask them what their price is. And if it's not in your budget, then you might have to say no. But if it is in your budget, just say like, okay, you know what you're worth. I believe you because I've seen your work. I know you're worth a lot. Let's do it. And you get good stuff out of it.
Yeah. Let me see here. It looked like we wanted to backtrack very, very briefly. Tennyson, what did you want to kind of piggyback off of?
I just wanted to say, I wanted to lean into Swordsfall's point about communication, and it's one of my core practices. If I'm making an agreement with someone, I know what I want from them, and I know what I can give them, and I make it very, very clear up front. If there's any question marks or things I don't, I specifically tell them what I don't know. And it's vital because otherwise someone's going to wind up feeling betrayed. Someone's going to either assume something that isn't true, or they're going to hope for a specific answer to a question that probably has a different answer, especially if you feel ashamed. So you've got to so you've got to make sure that you cover those things up front, because otherwise you are literally setting yourself to betray. So you cannot keep those things on the back burner and or hope they're going to work themselves out. You got to deal with the conflicts of the relationship right up front. Anything that could create conflict, deal with it up front. It's so important to communicate. I feel like an idiot for not having said that the first time around, and Brandon said it, and I was like, oh my fucking God, now I sound like I'm new at this.
It's all a learning experience, man. It's all a learning experience.
But
It's
Brandon's
okay.
he's 100% right. And I wanted to really pound that into the ground in case anyone thought there was like any room in that conversation.
And then Rachel, you also said that you had something you wanted to piggyback on.
Yeah, so Brandon actually did a great job of bringing this up. But also just from the freelancer side of things, the communication is just so important, because, as, especially on the editing side of things, as a freelance editor, it gives me the assurance that, like, you know exactly what I'm going to be doing with your work. You know what I'm looking for when I go through. You know how many times I'm going to go through, and you're okay with this. And it's not going to turn into, something where there's a creep in the scope of project later on, because we've talked about what your project is, what it entails, what you need from me, and what I need from you, right up front, so that everybody's on the same page. So I just wanted to kind of also say that, from the other side of this, kind of table, that it's so important on both sides.
Mm-hmm. No, completely agree with that. So take a shot for that, because I say that a lot as well. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about, before we really get into what you guys are working on, just a couple of more things about the products that and other services that you guys are kind of offering as far as content. Like, for example, Rachel, can you tell me a little bit about where the morning after that's available on your site, where that kind of came from, and what was the drive behind that?
Yeah, so that actually came up because about, I guess it was almost 2 years ago now. So I guess my deep dark secret on this this podcast is that I got my start from LARP communities, and so I have been involved with Dystopia Rising LARP, which is a zombie apocalypse LARP, for a very long time as a player. And a few years ago, they licensed the world to Onyx Path to do a tabletop. And like, I had, prior to that, not written anything professionally for tabletop stuff. And there was no system in place at the time when they did their writer's call for it, but I super knew the Dystopia Rising world really well. And I had been DMing Dungeons and Dragons and other games for years and years and years. And so I thought, I'll put something in, I'll put something together. So it was a very limited writing sample that they needed. They basically said, use any, any game system that you're comfortable with. So the little snippet on my website that is the morning after was basically the writing sample that I ended up putting together to try and hit some of the story points and features of the Dystopia Rising world, while using the 5th edition rules, because that was what I was most comfortable with. So it's kind of turned into a, kind of the start of what would be a little adventure in a kind of apocalypse version of 5th edition rules. So that's what that is. I keep thinking I'm going to go back and write the whole thing so that you can have a great apocalypse train adventure. And I have yet to write that apocalypse train adventure, but, hopefully, now that I have a little more free time, maybe we'll get back to that.
Yeah, I mean, apocalypse might be really close to home at this point, so maybe you can bring some real world experiences there. Ooh, So
it's also
I-
totally a train heist. So yeah.
Oh hell yeah! Oh hell yeah! Maybe
Sounds
the train
wonderful.
house is for a cure for a disease that we might not have access to yet. Weird. I don't know where I'd get that from. So I wanted to, Tennyson, I wanted to talk about Jump Rangers a little bit more in depth. Not that you haven't, but what's interesting is when I went for Jump Rangers, you literally have each version of the core book and each kind of improvement you've made. What was the deciding factor behind that of wanting to be so collaborative with that and just kind of pushing it there?
You know, a lot of my gaming experience over the last couple of years has been through Blizzard. And I really admire their ability to there's two things it takes to succeed in show business. One of them is excellence in your craft. If you're not the best at what you know, you owe the job to the person who is. And then the second thing is um you have to, as I said, maintain community around you, and you have to treat everybody like that community. And Blizzard's been fantastic about releasing a great game on day one and then making sure that everyone has access to the best possible game at any given point in time and that they're always able to communicate with each other. And, you know, what Brandon was saying about the book, as it were, I mean, retail's dead. It is. So, what does that mean for tabletop role playing? And it just felt like Patreon for me was such a great interface for tabletop because you can build a world and everyone who is subscribing and being a part of that can have access to any part of that world at all times. Now it puts the onus on you to constantly be creating content because you have to justify the subscription.
Mhm.
But because people can sign in for a month and download everything. But as long as you build the workflow into, and as long as you're serious about the work, as long as it's a job and you're ready, then you know, I think it's an ideal environment. And at that point, why not make every iteration available as early as possible in the process? If there's balance changes or, you know, and so when it comes to how we're going to put, and then I broke up the core book into chapters just because it's easier to iterate that way. I can upload a chapter. I don't have to mess with the whole thing. And then all the expansion material for the core book is available in a separate paywall server. And I just add people to that server as we go, as they become subscribers. So, you know, as we get art, I'll make some art available in the core book server and a lot of art available in the subscription server. I'm going to be one of my composer for film is a great, fantastic person named Dan Hegarty, who happens to be one of the first Jump Rangers in history. He's been playing this game for probably 7 or 8 years now. And you know, I just released a mission pack that's dedicated to him because it's stupid in exactly the way that he loves. And I, you know, and it's reckless and it's fast. There's a timer. There's an actual timer in the game. It's called the Lightning Job. Anybody who follows us on Patreon and follows us on Twitter can have a free book. That's the book you should get because it gets you right into the game. It's a one night mission. It's a lot of work for the storyteller, but it's a blast, and I recommend it. So that kind of stuff, and then you know I can get Dan. I'm trying to figure out how much it's going to cost to get Dan building a soundtrack for Jump Rangers, and I want to start building the themes musically that we can use in other media. I want to have a sound for Jump Rangers that works and that we can keep building. You know, and I can just put that I can put it in the server, and then you've got it on your computer and play it during it's perfect. So I almost feel why would I want to stray from that? I don't know if there's going to be financial incentives to. You know, I've had some good advice from some very serious and very well-established TTRPG publishers that I've been working on with other stuff. That's a direction I will want to go in eventually, and that there will have to be a book. But I'm like, does there? Maybe I can just do Patreon better than everybody.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, that's the question I'm asking.
I approve of this energy.
You got that big Patreon energy.
Yeah. It's possible. We don't need a truckload of money to make this work. And eventually Jump Rangers is going to become other kinds of content. We're going to do comics. P-Bell and I already discussed this, and that's part of the plan. And I can't wait to get into toys and this is my core audience. This is the core people that love the universe and are helping me build it now and who love the game that I'm designing. Why do we need another venue for that is my question. I don't know. Maybe there's a good reason. I'll figure it out. But right now, does that make sense?
No, I think it makes sense. Yes. No, I think it's fair. I think that's fair.
I am, by the way, an asshole. Like, that's just.
No,
So-
you're just blind.
I'm completely aware that there's a whole lot of stuff I don't know about this, and I'm willing to voice ignorant ideas with incredible enthusiasm just for the sake of entertainment. That's part of what you get.
Good save. Great save.
Just so we're clear, I'm ready to get punched in the face.
And to go verbally punch him in the face, Brandon, you had something that you want to pick up?
That's your cue, Brandon. Anybody there?
Maybe.
Did we lose Brandon? No.
I had to gather my thoughts about this so that I could properly articulate it from the bottom of my soul about how terrible Blizzard is currently and has been for like 3 to 4 years now. And the Blizzard that people have in their mind is the Blizzard from 20 years ago, because all those people are not at Blizzard. Like David Brevik and all of them, they're gone. The Blizzard model, the worst. And now that I got that in the system, I actually do want to seriously talk about that though, because for me, what I've noticed, and I don't know, this is like a sidetrack, but I feel like so first off, let me like elaborate. As I kind of like hinted before, like I've done video game work. I don't talk about it a lot because I was young and I signed some weird contracts, so there is some stuff I don't know to this day what I can and cannot, and I'd rather just avoid the kerfluffle, you know what I mean? But I've worked inside of some companies, and I think people confuse what it's like on the outside as a customer for internally how they actually structure things. A lot of the things that people love from those companies like Blizzard were the individual devs themselves. As those devs left, those things that you love went with it. And a lot of the same things happens in RPGs, and we sometimes get too enamored with the name and forget that it was the people that made the name. And so like that, I think that's a lesson that a lot of people need to learn, because I think we've all dealt with some companies that we have a love for and name and wondered what's different, and then what's different is the people. And that's a business strat that I think, especially in our sector, we kind of always have to keep in mind, is that we call it cult of personality, but really it's more of a force of personality. And a company knows how to take that and magnify it and use it to either get you into their product or away from something else. But that force of personality always comes from someone's particular vision. And the question is, can you mold that vision into something that other people can understand at a glance? You know, like, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but there's something to say about what happens when you successfully merge that with a word, which, if people have been watching, that's what I've been spending the last year doing with Swordsfall. It's not an accident, but like, we empower words. Like, it's a people thing. Like, this is where like my philosophy degree shows, because we have a really weird relationship with words that we tend to not recognize. Like Blizzard, we don't really think snow anymore for like the average, especially if you're a gamer. Like, you know what I mean? A company has successfully redefined how we look at a word by default. If you Google it, Blizzard, you're probably not going to get snow first. So you have to put snow Blizzard now, you know? So, and in that, Blizzard gets to associate all the things that it's done over its life. So when it does a good game, that goes into the bank of what Blizzard is as a name. And that's what a brand is. And people say brand, and we kind of say it in a funny way, but all brand means is, it means it's a word that brings up memories. And all a company is trying to do is get you to remember all the good stuff and not the bad stuff. And it's a shield, and it's something we fall for a little bit. And I know we've been kind of like dancing around like the whole like apocalypse COVID, but that's it. We say the same thing right now. And to parlay that to tabletop, that's kind of what a lot of the industry is dealing with, is the fact that corporations know how to weaponize words, but they don't tell you that they did it. So we only go by what we think or what we feel, and a lot of times we're going to fill in what we want. So if it's a company that we like, no, we're going to go, well, I'm sure they meant it good, right? You know what I mean? If it's a company that we it's like EA, nah, anything with EA, trash. What about this thing was good? Nah, trash. Like we get those sort of things automatically in it, and the company knows that, and they're really good at figuring out how to weave in between it, and that knowledge hasn't really sifted down to the smaller bits of stuff like tabletop RPGs. And so I don't really have a good segue other than the fact that it was just that Blizzard is not a good example, because it's just that it's the problem with looking to a company that's too big to emulate, because there's so many moving parts that what you see is not what it started off as. And that's kind of the danger of it, you know?
That's a fair statement. It just, the observations that I made in particular really mesh with what I happen to know about showbiz.
Just never say Blizzard.
Got it. Never. Roger. Thank you for the tip.
It's just there's also a thing where and it's kind of why I run my business the way I do. I've been in various levels of unfortunate parts of various industries, you know, and I've seen how companies are really good at, like, it's almost like a magic trick, honestly, because it's really about moving around the cup so you don't know where things are. And I don't necessarily mean in a bad thing, because we do that all the time. Like, we just need that. Like, any developer, sometimes you know the weakest part of your games, and you're like, don't look at this part, look at the shiny part. Like, so we have to, but we also have to know when that's being done to us. And that way, when we are looking to do our own company, we're not accidentally modeling the bad parts because we saw good output. And like, that's especially something I see when people do hiring. Like, I've had a lot of people that are like, oh, so you're gonna like get big and hire people? I'm like, oh, that's not how it works at all. Like that's a corporate model that is built upon like tax returns and all sorts of crazy stuff and P&Ls that like you don't want to do. Trust me, like, do not. Like, freelance, learn how to like work with people. And it's just, there's like this middle ground of skills that I don't think we've quite gotten there as a whole in the industry. And that's kind of been like my extra thing I want to do, is just like hand that knowledge, because the more people get it, the easier it is for everybody. And like, what's wrong with having better quality games for everybody? Like, don't get me wrong, I want you to buy Swordsfall, but I also want you to buy like other people's stuff, and I want other people's stuff to be good and bring more attention and bring more money as a whole, you know? And I just think that part of that comes with just, there are healthy models out there. The problem is the way they do it is usually a lot less flashier, and it's harder to know the points that were good. You know, like if I wasn't active on Twitter and tell people what I was doing, no one would really know how I Swordsfall. They would be like, man, this art's so great, I wonder why. And it would, you know, you wouldn't really know, but pulling back that sort of curtain really helps. And
I agree.
Yeah, that was my TED Talk. Thank you.
Oh, wow. I think we got a question from the chat, because Brandon, you mentioned it, about you have different RPG writers that you love. What's something that like does everyone have a certain RPG writer that they like? I'm just gonna shoot that at all of you.
Man, I do, but I would butcher people's names, and hold on. That's like my least favorite thing to do in life.
Okay. If you want to look their name, Jacob, do you have anyone that you particularly like as far as RPG style goes, or something that you draw inspiration from?
Well, my entire life I've been bad at remembering to look at the names behind the things. So like, people could mention famous actors, I'm like, who? And they're like, oh, from this movie. And like, oh yeah, I've seen that. Same way with RPGs. Like, I know what games I've liked, but I have no idea who made them.
Yeah, I can name books, and people can like look up who's in the book, which they should. Like, that's also a really good way to find out who. I don't think people realize that like a lot of those people are just freelance. So like, I mean, I have like Jonah Loeb, who did like the dragons in Skyrim, and that was just a random Twitter conversation. And then I emailed him. I was like, so like, you legit, you for real, you wanna do this? He's like, yeah. Like, you know, I mean, who would have thought to ask the guy who did dragons in Skyrim to do it for your game? Like, that would have been crazy town.
Yeah.
but it's a thing. So like, yeah, pull open the book. Like that, it works. A lot of them will be flattered that you actually bothered to look up who they were. And I'm not joking, especially writers like, oh yeah, for sure. Like, do it.
So
That's-
then I guess that kind of segues into the other chat question, which was, what kind of indie games do you guys particularly like playing and that people should be looking into? So I'll go back to the original rotation. Rachel, do you have anything that you think people haven't heard of but they really should?
So as far as indie games, I'm gonna actually pass on this one because a lot of what I do is pretty mainstream, and I feel like other people might have more insight on this.
Okay, that's fair. I will come with a different question for you then. And then, yeah, Tennyson, do you have anything that, like an indie game that you're really interested in or really passionate about that other people should really check into?
Well, I'm just now getting into Samurai Androids, which I definitely is.
Yeah.
It's a fun night. I recommend it to every. It's fast. It's simple. It doesn't have a large buy-in in terms of getting to know the game, and it's, you know, for all of that, it's fun and it's deep and it's worth checking out. So I recommend it.
Brandon, anything that you like that's independent that not a lot of people have heard of?
I know what I'm gonna do because I always give my followers shit about, hey, if you have a game, you should tell me. So I'm gonna talk about the one who told me about their games as I've told them to. I tell people like, hey, like if you
Awesome.
every advertisement, you have to talk about it. Like that, you know, it's just part of the do the thing. So I know we have there's Monsters of Merca from I'm gonna mess up Gerard's last name, but D&D, not my jam, but it's like heavy satire, and especially what's going on right now. I definitely need my troll that suspiciously looks like Trump, and his is like the humor in it is just like, I'm a big fan of humor done right. I hate lazy humor. Like, I don't mean to be mean, but like, you know, like it's when something is really just funny, that witty funny that you're like, oh, and it's full of that. He did a really good job of really good humor. So I actually kickstarted him when he got out. And there's also my buddy Riley, who goes by Kilderkin on Twitter. He's doing a whole it's called Packless Patrons, and it's basically like literally like Warlike Patrons without packs, and it's kind of gonna be like I guess it's like an animated sort of comedy show. And I'm butchering it, but it's really cool. I'm gonna put it like that. So that's gonna be really good. And there was someone else. I'm trying to find. Oh, then there's Cinna. Oh, I'm gonna mess up Joshua's name of his game. See, this is why I need a list, because I'm just like, I can see the covers in my head. I try to remember the name. Cena. My wife's gonna look it up. It's really good. Anyway, he Cena Luna, yeah. And it's kind of like what I'm trying to do with Swordsfall, but it's South American more lore. Like, yeah, so that's looking really good. He did it on Indiegogo. I think that's why that one kind of slipped people's radar, because Indiegogo is just Indiegogo.
Yeah.
But he goes by HTT Paladin on Twitter, and he also is the one who did my character sheets for Summon of Kings. So if you've seen the character sheets, they're super crisp, and that was all him. There was also, I keep up with a lot of indie stuff, but normally I'm the kind of person that sees someone doing something good, person who gives you like the like and the retweet when you had 0.
Yeah.
Tenny knows about that one. I'm like, why are you? It's like, why does no one like this? This is unacceptable.
Gotta bring it to the forefront.
I'm just serious. Like, I want people to ping me with their cool stuff. Now, with that said, I am not the kind of person to give free cookies. I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, I want you to do the thing, but also, if you get support from me, it's not bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't support stuff I don't like. I mean, I'll give you like a free whatnot because you're doing the thing, but like, you know what I mean? If you get that extra thing from me, it's because I mean it. So like, don't feel bad if I don't say something, but that's just me ethically. But do the thing. Feel free to tag me, whatever. I try to look at every tweet. I have like a 98% read tweet, like tweets. Don't DM me. Please, dear God, do not DM me. Twitter DMs are the worst. It's just they get buried and then they like refresh when you try to look, like when you try to scroll up. And I have so many DMs. If I scroll up past where it cuts off, it starts to load like 4-8 times. I'm like, oh, stop. So like literally beyond the 8th DM, I cannot. That's why I tell people do not DM me. Like it will get lost. I will not see it.
So if you're looking to slide into Brandon's DMs, don't do it.
Slide into my email. Slide into my email. Take me to dinner.
Oh, shit.
Say nice things.
Take him to Burger King.
Hey, shit. Let me have it my way. That's all I'm saying.
Yo, okay. Jacob, do you have any kind of like indie games that you're really passionate about or that you really enjoy?
So I usually, because I was kind of unplugged from the indie scene until fairly recently, so there's ones that I'm curious to try. I'm really curious about Starcrossed, which is basically romantic Jenga.
What?
So I'm curious about that. I might try to see if I can get my wife to try that with me sometime.
Oh, so many jokes.
Oh, hell yeah. Pull it out. So,
Don't
Starcross.
do it.
Now you made me forget what the other one I was going to say.
Sorry. Lovely.
What was it? Well, I don't remember what the other one was, but then there's one that I saw on Indiegogo, not an indie game, but like an indie adventure for D&D called Harper's Tale. There's a kid named Harper with cancer and had a wish of creating a D&D adventure. And so parents and some other people banded together, rounded up some adventure writers, did an Indiegogo campaign, and now an adventure called Harper's Tale that's about healing the land from a sickness is going to be a thing. I think it's coming out this summer or fall, and I am looking forward to getting that and running that when I can.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. That I didn't even hear about that. So yeah, if you could like actually tweet that out, I'd love to look at that and
For sure.
Yeah, same,
Please.
actually.
So everyone check that out. 110%. I wanted to actually pitch it to my co-host because he's been extremely quiet.
It's weird when you're
Michael,
not next to me.
I know there's an indie game that we've tried playing. Do you want to elaborate that for our panel and for our listeners?
we purchased the City of Mist book like a year ago, maybe longer. I don't know, but we just never have enough time in our week, day by day, to try and play it. But we've played a couple sessions of it, and it's phenomenal. Like the whole point is that you are in this mystical world, and you represent some sort of mythos, some sort of mythical object or legendary being, and you have powers from it, and it's very, very story oriented. It's like a mystery noir type thing, and I've tried to storytell, but I'm terrible at storytelling, so it always gets deferred to Shane, who does too much, so we don't really get to play it.
He is a forever DM. I wanted to just briefly touch upon. I think people should really check out Dread, which is scary Jenga instead of sexy Jenga. That's one of my go-tos. That if I can't think of anything, Dread's always a good thing, and I love horror movies, so it's easy to kind of put a skin on everything for that. There's one I really want to play that I saw that's Worldwide Wrestling because I'm a huge wrestling geek, and
It's so badass.
Yo, it's so bad.
It's so badass.
I want to be a hardcore legend so bad and just hit people with kendo sticks and make my knees like pop because I'm old.
Like that's the best way to collab with me is make a cool game because I want to message them and
So I think we're gonna end this. We're gonna play Worldwide Wrestling. But no, you can go on DM's Guild and just look Worldwide Wrestling. They have an Intercontinental like expansion where they put like high flyers. If you're a huge Mark like I am, it's really really fucking cool. And then the last one that I really like is Tales from the Loop, which is basically like Stranger Things, like if the 80s that Stranger Things kind of saw, which was an expansion and a evolution of technology that really sped up in the 80s. So there's like robots and giant freighters that go through the magnetic lines in the earth, and it's really really cool system that we've tried for it. So if you have a chance to check that out, I would also really highly recommend that. Plus the art's just fucking dope as shit. And then we had another question, and this was for everyone. What is your favorite part of tabletop RPG making? Is it the world building? Is it the mechanics? Is it the situations? And then I'll punch that back over to Rachel. What's your favorite kind of part of making those supplements?
So I absolutely love writing adventures. That is above and beyond my favorite part of doing this. And a lot of that is because when I'm writing an adventure, I'm actually getting to build a story. I'm getting to give you characters that you can interact with and create situations that hopefully can really make you think about what you're doing and what your characters are doing and why. So, like, one of my favorite things that I have written was so we talked a little bit before about the morning after scenario that I started. That was an application to write for a tabletop game that they did hire me to write for. So I then got to do the adventure for the core book for Dystopia Rising Evolution, which is the tabletop game. And it's probably one of my favorite things that I've written because I got to delve so much into that dark, gritty world and really lean into kind of the moral gray. And there's characters in there that have, tragic, backgrounds, like, not to be cliche about it, but they have some serious stuff going on in their lives. They're dealing with some serious, emotions, and the players then get to interact with that and hopefully think about what that means in a very real perspective that can then be applicable to life in general. So I love doing adventures. I love doing world building for a lot of the same reasons. That's probably my favorite part.
Okay. I'll pitch it over to Tennyson. What's your kind of favorite part in this whole kind of process?
It depends on the game. My first game was a science fiction time travel game about a paramilitary organization and an espionage organization that's changing history so that humanity doesn't exterminate itself. To avoid our own self-destruction, they are altering history as we go. So there's missions from sort of a place where they're based into all points of human history to change the course of events and fix us. And I really didn't. I had a very rules-heavy system. It was very highly technical, and Jump Rangers was largely about distilling that to its most basic elements and then finding ways to make it fun. And that was gratifying to do that, I think, and it was gratifying to make it work and to have something that feels fun to play. Creating fun gameplay was cool as an experience. I love world building. I like creating things for actors. That's kind of what I do professionally, and it's just an opportunity for me to help people embrace that part of their lives. And for me, the rules just exist to make sure that there's stakes in the story. You understand what I mean by that? Like, if you're on top of a train and you're chasing the Russian spy because he's got the plan, jumping over to the next train car isn't dangerous if it's up to you and the storyteller. But the dice take the accountability away from everybody, at least in theory, right? At least, in the cup game that, Brandon was talking about, they create the lie that everything's at risk, or the truth, depending on how you play. And that creates stakes. So you've created this character in this world, and that character now can die. So all of a sudden those rules are what make the story work, because they keep your attention, because everything that you've invested in this story up until now could just go away. And so I don't, that's the medium that we're working in, and it's not, Right now, I'm the only writer on Jump Rangers.
Oh, shit.
I love the collaboration. I love creating things for people and bringing people together. That's what I. On to Brandon.
So on to Brandon. We'll go from a wholesome answer to Brandon.
That works. What am I answering again now?
So, what kind of is your favorite part about your process of making your RPG? Was it the world building? Was it the lore? Was it the character mechanics? I just wanted to say that two big things that kind of pop up when you go to the About Swordsfall is you put first thing to mention it's not based on D20 such as Dungeons and Dragons, and two, it's dice rolls are around 6 to 8 dice at a time when you throw them.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know if it was like the mechanic, because that's a little unheard of. Like, I feel good when I'm a paladin and I smite and I have like 10 d8s, but I just what was kind of like was that part of the enjoyment? Or
I think this is where, like, once again, like, I kind of come off as different because I don't necessarily call myself an RPG designer, right? I mean, like, if you look at Swordsfall, like, I clearly have not made the RPG the lifeblood of it. I mean, it's the way to interact with the world, but I don't really design in predefined chunks. Like, for me, I like to start with, like, let's say, like, when I first started Sourcefall, I started with like a sense of, okay, what do I want to do? I want it to be something fun for me and my friends, right? And it sounds like a small goal, but like that's something, right? Like, okay, well, who am I playing with? Well, I know my crew, and some of them want to play D&D, and then like a little voice in my head is like, yeah, but you're the one that's going to be running it and doing it, so like, what do you want? And that was like where I thought about story and design at the same time, because for me, one is fueled by the other, right? Like, for me, a game works best when the mechanics is realized in the game itself. And I think that's really clear, especially nowadays when we've had a few games where you learn something for the whole game and you get to the very end and then the boss is like, hey, let's have a completely different kind of a boss fight that involves nothing you've learned the whole game, because that'd be fun, right? And it feels disjointed, right? And I feel like that's what happens when you think about one piece and one piece only. So I think about it as like a whole. Like, I kind of feel like I'm baking a pie, Like, you can't necessarily decide which part of the piece of the pie you care the most about. Sure, maybe you like crust, but that doesn't mean you can just make like what's inside of it. Like, there is a balance to it all. But there is a favorite part that you like, and that's the part that you do the extra for. So for me, like, I go back and forth because I like story, but I also want to be able to act it out. So I usually think about things in a very like action piece. Like, most of what I design starts off in my head as like a mini movie or like a piece of a show, right? I think very active elements, and then I fill in around it. So for, like, say my Killer Crew, which is probably like my most popular characters that I've made so far, I started them off in a scene. Like, I imagined them in a bank holding up a dude, right? And as I imagined the scene, I imagined each of their personalities, and I thought about the things I wanted and the things I didn't want. And as I thought about that, I kind of filled it in. So it wasn't just world, it wasn't just story, it wasn't just one or the other. It was kind of like I made the box and then I kind of painted it in, And I was like, well, we're going to have some pirates. What's a good number? 4 is a good number. Why not? Sure, 4, right? And I'm like, well, we want this to be diverse. So we're going to some tropes, but have fun with them, but not be anti-trope, because it's a trope to not be the trope, right? So
Right.
technically, you have to guide the middle. So it was like, okay, well, I want someone dynamic. What would be a dynamic character? And that's just kind of how I thought about it. And then as I'm thinking about who they are, a little part of me goes, okay, but what do they do? How are they going to fight? Like, right, they're pirates. They got to have some cool fighting style. And that's when the part of me that thinks about rules kind of makes like a note. Like, okay, you're going to do some kind of cool pirate foo or something, right? Like something cool. And then later on, when I get to the point that I'm like, okay, if this was in the game, how would that work? How would you want it to work? And then I kind of imagine in that same scene how a player would try to act that out. And that's ultimately why I picked the system I did. That's why I picked Genesis, but that's also why I like ripped Genesis in half and then redid it to my own making, because there was an element I wanted. I wanted the dice to elevate the scene, right? I wanted you to be in an element with your group of people, your friends or whatnot, and I want you to be thinking the whole time, how can you and your buddies get out of the situation, get into the situation, whatever, rather than being like, I only have one spell slot left. I hope there's not a battle. Like, you know what I mean? I know those elements, and I don't want that in my game. I want it to be the game to where you look up and you're like, is that the sun? Did we play all night? You know what I mean? So it's always, how can I make it easier? Or like, not to use buzzwords, but as like they say, how to make it frictionless, right? Because that's what you're trying to do. Make it to where there's no element that makes someone stop, because that's the element that pulls you out and says, okay, time to have a night, guys. So it's always about how to make it smooth. And as much as gamers really love an abundance of dice, it's also a real stressor for anybody who's not super involved in the game. And for me, what I've noticed the most is that as much as we have like core gamers, we have a ton of people who are on the outside who D&D looks cool, but also like there's math. I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? So they kind of get off of it before they even get on it. So I really wanted to have a system that felt like it was approachable, but also could be like crunchy and usable.
Okay.
And I didn't quite hit it with some of the keys, and that was just me learning the lesson of you can only a system so much, which was still a good lesson that I like to learn. But for me, I just find that, especially in my world, it works better if I make sure that everything is in balance, that the roles only facilitate what you need to do in the game or what I want you to do in the game, and that the story gives you a place that it feels like you can always be with characters that maybe you can't be, like in terms of control as a character, but characters that you can get excited about seeing, you know, and that require story. So then like I write some story, you know what I mean? So it's more of a having everything support the scene. It's a little bit more like a movie, or I mean, it's like a video game. I design tabletop RPGs like a video game, and it works really well. And a lot of people are like, "Oh, you can't do that." And I'm like, but what if I told you we've been doing that forever? Like, you know, the amount of systems behind a video game that mimic a tabletop, I mean, they're so close. There's a reason why you see that overlap, right? But we haven't really taken the concepts to go with it. And the concept, especially in video game, is you don't build what the players don't interact with. You just don't. You know what I mean? You cut it off. Like, if, oh, they're not going to go down that street, nothing exists beyond that street. But in tabletops, we have a tendency to do that. Like, why make 100 king lineage if no one's going to see 99 of them?
Right.
You know what I mean? So I try to keep track on that by just kind of keeping focus on what I'm trying to do for that moment. If it's a scene, or like when I was writing Summon of Kings, I was writing a game, but I also knew on a short game, how do I get you excited about why you should spend $10 on 20 pages, right? Cool. Make the pages awesome. Does that mean more art, more words? No. What does that mean? Probably the ability to feel like you can spend $10 but actually still play this more than once, or think it's a one shot and you get almost through the session and you're like, oh, this is more than a one shot. This is like an 8 shot, but everybody's on board, which like a couple of groups have already found out. You know what I mean? So I just try to keep it on message. I just hate that term because it doesn't mean anything per se, you know what I mean? But I just try to keep it in terms of what my objective is and what I need to do to support that.
Well,
kind of a lengthy answer, but
no,
that's my answer.
you definitely answered it. And then Jacob, I wanted to ask you what your favorite part of your process is, and is it building? Is it world building? Like, what do you enjoy?
So as you might infer from my catalog of things I've made, I've done most work in mechanical design, because it's mostly, you know, player options for D&D and then a couple other things. So interestingly, it's kind of for some of the same reasons that Brandon mentioned, that like when somebody's playing a game and they try to do something and the rules get in the way and they hit that stopping point, that's bad. And so I like designing mechanics that will support the things you want to do and not also get in the way of other things you want to do.
Come on.
So, like the Slayer class for D&D,
Mm-hmm.
if you're already playing D&D and looking at third-party classes, you've bought into there being a lot of rules, and you want each rule to be representing something. So if you're trying to play some sort of smart fighter, there's nothing that connects that concept to the gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made a class where, no, your intelligence actually matters for this. It will influence what gameplay is like for you. So it sort of connects the in-universe play with the table play, and I like making that connection. And then that's also why I made Journey Away, where there's barely any mechanics. Literally, all the dice do is tell you to think about what's going on in the scene right now, then roll the dice, and the people on either side of you will change what's going on in the scene, and now you've all got to adapt to that and change your narration, but most of the time you're just narrating. So if you already like just telling stories and you not need to make 2 pages of combat character sheet like you do for D&D, then Journey Away can take care of you, and you can just go tell your story, and the rules will just poke their head in just enough to say, hey, let's change it up real quick and stir the pot. And then Ether of Adara, that system is somewhere in between, where there's all sorts of things you might do. I'm not trying to push you towards one thing or another. And when you do something, there's not going to be a lot of math that gets in the way. It's going to be really simple, really intuitive, but very flexible. So you can just say, okay, I'm going to do the thing. We want tension. Let's roll a die, see if we succeed. And it's a very quick, clean process where you get to interpret things. So I guess overall, I like making mechanics that can connect gameplay to the in-universe experience, which probably stemmed from those bad experiences in Pathfinder before.
Fucking Pathfinder, man.
I really liked something I learned about myself in that time was that knowing a lot of rules can be useful for something other than being a rules lawyer. Because I saw this constant tension between DMs would try to use knowledge of the rules or just their own authority to say no to players, and then players would try to use the rules to defend against that and say, no, I can do this. So I would use the rules to say, okay, what do you want to do? I can translate that for you. And I learned to do it really, really quickly. So I would say, well, I want to do this. And I would translate it, say, okay, that's these actions, these roles, do it, and then translate it back immediately, say, this is what's happening in the universe, and just do it back and forth for them.
Mm-hmm.
So that probably led to why I focus more on designing mechanics, because I like that connection and translation that can get people supported in the type of game they're trying to do.
Okay. I know that I know Brandon, you had something, but we are running a little bit over. But go ahead if you want to shoot it out real quick.
I was just when Jacob, when you were bringing up about how rules being used for, and that's something that as a creator I've been thinking a lot about because I've been on both sides of that, you know. And I was just thinking about how I feel like that's a problem that shows that the table is not all on board together about what the story is, right? Like sometimes you're playing the table story, sometimes you're playing the GM story, sometimes you're playing the collab story. But I feel like when tables have that battle, it's because the players and the GM have realized they're not on the same side as to where they want this to go. And then they're both trying to use whatever tools they have to get that leverage back because they're like, no, I wanted to go back in this place that we were at. And yeah, I don't know. I don't really have an answer per se. It's like one of those things I've been thinking on, but I feel like it's something I've noticed while watching tables. When a table's together in terms of like who's driving the story, you see a lot less rules lawyering as a group and usually like a person versus a person. The min-maxer who that's what they do, you know, versus like the table feeling like it's against the GM.
Yeah, the whole table collaboration is definitely something I'm a big proponent of. I even try to sneak that into my D&D work because D&D is bad about that a lot. Thanks, Gygax. So I've even snuck in things like where there's like an open-ended spell that usually it would be written as you can do this, subject to DM adjudication. I say as appropriate or as seems plausible. So things that make it like, let's all talk about what this should look like and all be on the same page.
Okay. Let me see here. Because once again, we are running a little bit over time. I wanted to kind of give you guys all the opportunity really quick. Where can the masses find you? What are you working on? What can they expect from you within the next couple of months or weeks? And we'll start off with Rachel.
Okay. So the best place to find me and keep track of what I'm working on right now is on Twitter at rwritesthings. I also have a website that has a list of everything that I have out right now or that is coming out in the near future, which is www.rachelwritesthings.com. At present, I have a bunch of editing things that are up in the air that I'm working on, and I recently finished a setting expansion for Odysseys and Overlords, which is a 5th edition kind of darker, grittier setting. So I got to write about a bunch of vampires who are literally eating the poor. So that was a lot of fun. You can check that out. That's linked on my website. And I'm likely going to be opening up some slots to do some online DMing in the near future, possibly in the next couple days as I get things together. All of that will be on my Twitter page, and in the meantime, I do have a dice giveaway going on my Twitter page. So if you check out that page, you could win some free dice, and that's fun. So stop by, say hi, and it's been a pleasure being here with all of you.
Likewise.
Tennyson, where can the masses find you, my guy?
My Twitter is Tennyson, TENNYSONE. Stead, STEAD. You can follow me there if you want the film stuff and the game stuff. I'm a pretty hardworking screenwriter and filmmaker as well, so there's a lot going on in my world. If you just are interested in the game stuff, all my gaming tweets get retweeted by Jump Rangers at Jump Rangers. And you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Jump Rangers, spelled just exactly the way you think it is. And again, I will emphasize that our core book is free. And the other thing that we've published free so far is a complete index of every concept and everything. And it tells you where to find it in the expansion books, because I tend to be a little bit all over the place when I write supplemental material. So I've built this whole database. And, if you want to find out what's in Jump Rangers, that's what's in Jump Rangers.
Awesome.
So please check us out at patreon.com/Jump. And if you like the game, please subscribe.
Brandon, let's throw it to you. Where can the people find you, Meg?
I'm easy. All you need to do is Google Swords Fall, and you find everything, because I have the best CEO in the industry, and I've dominated the whole page. So yeah, type in Swords Fall. You'll find everything. It's easy. It's great. Type in Summon of Kings. You'll find that game too. It's great. You should buy it. That's I'm memorable like that. I'm daring people. No, I want people to test it, because people are like, wait, what? And then I get free Google hits because you typed in Swords Fall, and then I get respect because you'll see that I'm right. It's a win-win. I appreciate it.
Win with Brandon, please. Do what he says. And Jacob, where can the people find you, and what are you working on?
So the place I talk the most is Twitter at Jacob S. Kellogg. Kellogg has 2 L's, 2 G's, just like the cereal. I have work on the DMs Guild, dmsguild.com. I work on itch.io. Right now, I'm working on a sequel to the Elemental Spellbook for D&D, because the first one only covered fire, ice, lightning, and there's more that people wanted. So working on the next batch of that. I've got other projects kind of back burner at the moment. I hope to do a lot of restructuring of what I'm focused on and how much time I can put into it and how I go about things once I have a day job and know where my sustenance comes from for the foreseeable future. In the meantime, I'm squeezing in D&D on the margins, and Elemental Spellbook 2 is what's coming up next.
Fair enough. And then you guys can find us, of course, at Top Tabling. Michael, if you want to plug your Twitter, if people want to bombard you with tweets, please do it. Slide into Michael's DMs.
At
'Cause I need
Miehek,
it.
Miiehek. I will probably miss all of it.
And you can get at me at Mr. Purple 187. And then right as we kind of wrap, Brandon, I know you don't like D&D 5e, but I'm going to ask a D&D 5e question. So if we were going to make an adventuring party, I would like to know what class you would play and what race you would play. So we'll start with Rachel.
So I am a big fan of 5th edition bards, and I'm also kind of a big fan of the Tortle package that they released. So I'm gonna go with a Tortle bard.
Oh yeah.
Love it.
Okay. Tortle Bard. Tennyson.
Gosh, I have to admit that I have not played Dungeons and Dragons since second ed AD&D.
Go with your heart. Go with your AD&D heart.
I think I'm probably a Dwarven Bard.
Dwarven Bard. That's 2 bards. Okay. Brandon.
I homebrewing a Karoo Celestial Shield.
Done.
Done. And Jacob.
We're talking about translating myself, or what would I want?
Yeah, what would you play on that?
If I wanted to pick something to play, it'd probably be a class I made. One that launched my class designing was the Mage Knight Halfcaster. So swords and magic, mix it up.
Hell yeah. Okay, Mage and Knight. I liked the Mage and Knight. And then what was the race for it?
Probably human.
All
I don't
right.
have any special abilities.
That's okay. We all have our own special abilities. So thank you guys so much for being here.
This was
Really,
wonderful.
really appreciate it. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Hopefully we can do it again soon. Guys, thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. Wash your hands, don't touch your face, be safe. And we'll
Happy quarantine con, everybody.
Happy
Yay.
quarantine con. Don't forget to cough on your favorite government official that you don't like. Anyway,
Shane says he's going to put all the links for everyone's products and stuff as soon as we're done.
It'll show up on the screen for a few minutes.
awesome.
Thank you.
So throw that up,
Cool, thank you.
and we'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.